"That's enough. We've heard what we need to hear." He said it the way men say things when they have never once been told no. Flat, final, certain. The microphone was in Zara Coleman's hand one moment and gone the next, lifted from her grip by the event coordinator who crossed the stage at a half jog, responding to the single raised finger of the man at the judge's table as though that finger were a law. Zara stood at the center of the stage, 16 years old, in a white dress her grandmother had ironed that morning, the last note of her song still vibrating somewhere in the rafters of the Millbrook Community Auditorium. The crowd of 400 people had gone completely still, not the stillness of applause building, the other kind. His name was Derek Foss. He sat at the center of the judge's table, flanked by two others who had not moved, who had not spoken, who were already studying the papers in front of them as though the stage had gone dark. Foss leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who had never once worried about a room's opinion of him. He was the chairman of the Millbrook Arts Foundation, the primary funder of the Tri-County Youth Talent Showcase, and he had been making decisions like this one for 11 years without consequence. Zara did not move. She stood with her hands at her sides, her chin level, her eyes on a point just above the audience. She said nothing. What Derek Foss did not know was who he had just silenced. He did not know what that girl had built, quietly, invisibly, over the course of her short life. He did not know what was about to happen in that room. And when the truth came out, when 400 people found their voices all at once, it cost him everything he had spent a decade constructing. Stay with this one to the end. Every detail is here for a reason. But before we get there, let me take you back to the beginning. Let me show you who Zara Coleman really was. Now, here's what most people in that auditorium did not know about Zara Coleman. She had been singing since she was 4 years old. Not performing. Singing. There is a difference, and her grandmother, Loretta Coleman, had taught her that difference before Zara was old enough to read music. Loretta had grown up in rural Mississippi, the daughter of a Baptist choir director, and she had carried the music north to Millbrook, Ohio, the way you carry something irreplaceable. Carefully, deliberately, with both hands. She kept a small upright piano in the front room of her house on Calder Street, and every Sunday afternoon after church, she would sit beside Zara on the bench and teach her not just the notes, but the weight behind them. "The song is not about you," Loretta would say, her voice low and even, the way she said everything important. "The song is a vessel. You are just the one carrying it." Zara had taken that in the way children take in the things that matter most, not by understanding them immediately, but by storing them somewhere deep and returning to them again and again as she grew. She moved in silence. She built in silence. She did not post videos online. She did not perform at school talent shows or church socials for the attention. She sang in Loretta's front room, and then in the small practice studio at the Millbrook Community Music Center, where a man named Harold Briggs, a retired session musician who had played keyboards on 3 Grammy-winning records and never once mentioned it, had been her teacher for 6 years. Harold charged Loretta $40 a month for lessons, a fraction of what he could have asked, because he had recognized something in Zara's voice the first afternoon she sang for him, and he did not want money to be the reason it went undeveloped. Harold was a compact, deliberate man who wore the same brown cardigan to every lesson and kept a cup of cold coffee on the piano lid that he never drank. He did not give compliments easily. What he gave instead was time and precision, and the particular kind of attention that tells a student they are worth the effort. He had told Zara, in their third year together, that her voice had a quality he had heard in perhaps 4 singers in his life. He said it once. He did not repeat it. He went back to the lesson. Loretta's maxim lived in Zara's chest like a second heartbeat. Stay low, build high. Do the work where no one is watching, and let the work speak when the moment comes. The moment, as it turned out, was the Tri-County Youth Talent Showcase. Zara had not wanted to enter. It was Harold who suggested it, in his careful, understated way, during a lesson in March. He had looked at her over the top of the piano and said, "You are ready to be heard by more than me." That was all. Zara had thought about it for 2 weeks, talked it over with Loretta on the porch on a Thursday evening while the neighborhood settled into its quiet, and then she had filled out the application. She chose to sing "Cry Me a River," the Julie London version, spare and devastating, because it was a song Harold had told her showed the full range of what her voice could do. She had been preparing it for 4 months. She did not tell anyone outside of Loretta and Harold that she had entered. That was who Zara Coleman was. 16 years old, 6 years of serious training, a voice that a man who had played on Grammy-winning records called singular. And she walked into the Millbrook Community Auditorium that Saturday morning in her grandmother's ironed white dress, carrying all of that invisibly the way Loretta had taught her. Now, let me tell you about Derek Foss and the world he had built around himself, and why a room full of 400 people had learned to go silent when he raised one finger. Derek Foss had made his money in commercial real estate. He had done it efficiently and without particular distinction, inheriting a portfolio from his father-in-law and expanding it through a combination of competence and ruthlessness that he had long since reframed in his own mind as vision. He was 53 years old, trim, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular confidence that comes not from having been tested and survived, but from having never been seriously tested at all. He wore a blazer to the talent show the way he wore a blazer everywhere, as a statement about who was in charge. He had joined the Millbrook Arts Foundation Board 8 years ago, become its chairman 5 years later, and had since positioned himself as the cultural arbiter of the county. The Tri-County Youth Talent Showcase was his signature event. He had restructured its format, redesigned its judging criteria, and made himself the head judge in a move that no one on the board had formally objected to, partly because he funded 40% of the foundation's operating budget and partly because no one wanted to find out what objecting would cost them. He had opinions about talent. He stated them with the confidence of expertise he did not possess. He had no formal music training, no performance background, no credentials in arts education. What he had was certainty, and in the rooms he occupied, certainty had always been sufficient. The dramatic irony was this: Derek Foss believed himself to be the most important person in that auditorium. He believed the showcase existed because of him, that the talent on that stage existed to be evaluated by him, and that his judgment was the final word on what had value and what did not. He had held that belief for 5 years without it being seriously challenged. He had cut off performers before: a nervous boy playing violin who had fumbled his opening, a girl whose dance routine he had deemed not ready for this level. He had done it with the same raised finger, the same flat certainty. No one had stopped him. He did not know that the girl in the white dress was different. He did not know about Harold Briggs or Loretta's piano, or 6 years of $40 lessons, or the 4 months of preparation behind a single song. He looked at Zara Coleman the way he had looked at every young performer who came from the east side of Millbrook, with a mild, preemptive skepticism that he would never have named as what it was. He saw a 16-year-old girl in a white dress. He had already formed his conclusion before she opened her mouth. And that conclusion was his first mistake. Zara walked to the microphone stand at the center of the stage. The auditorium held the particular quiet of a crowd settling into attention. She did not introduce herself with elaborate showmanship. She did not perform nervousness for the audience's sympathy. She stood straight, found her breath the way Harold had taught her, from the base, from the ground up, and she began. The first 8 bars of "Cry Me a River" came out of her with the control and a depth that were not what the audience had been expecting from a teenager. The woman in the third row, a retired music teacher named Constance Webb, set down the program she had been holding. 2 rows behind her, a man who had been scrolling his phone put it face down on his knee. The sound was not loud. It was not showy. It was the kind of singing that makes a room pay attention before it has decided to. Derek Foss was looking at his evaluation sheet. He looked up at bar 12. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, a slight forward lean that he caught and corrected, settling back into his practiced authority. He listened for another 30 seconds, and then, at the moment when Zara's voice was beginning to open into the song's second movement, the place where Harold had told her the real work lived, Foss raised one finger. The event coordinator, a young man named Marcus Tilley, saw it from the side of the stage. He had seen that finger before. He knew what it meant. He crossed the stage at a half jog, the way he always did, and he reached for the microphone. Zara felt it leave her hand. She stood at the center of the stage, in her grandmother's ironed white dress, and the last note she had been building toward dissolved into the auditorium's silence. 400 people watched. The woman in the third row, Constance Webb, pressed her lips together. The man with the phone did not pick it up. No one spoke. Foss said, "That's enough. We've heard what we need to hear." 8 words, delivered to a 16-year-old girl in front of 400 people, with the flat certainty of a man who had never once been made to reckon with the weight of them. Zara did not move. She did not look at him. She did not look at the audience. She stood with her hands at her sides, her chin level, her eyes on the back wall, and she breathed. She never raised her voice. She never broke her composure. She simply stood there, and the stillness of her was its own kind of answer. Marcus Tilley stood at the edge of the stage with the microphone in his hand, and he felt something he had not felt in 2 years of working these events. He felt ashamed. He was 24 years old, the son of a woman who had taught him that there were moments when staying quiet was the same as agreeing, and this was one of those moments. He looked at Zara standing there in her white dress, and he made a decision that he understood might cost him the contract he depended on. He did not walk back to the side of the stage. He stood where he was, holding the microphone, and he did not move. Foss noticed. His eyes went to Marcus with the particular coldness of a man who has been disobeyed in public. "Marcus," he said, the single word carrying the full weight of the professional relationship between them. "Return to your position." Marcus Tilley held the microphone in both hands. His jaw was tight. He said, quietly, "She wasn't finished." 3 words. They landed in the silence like stones in still water. And then the auditorium, which had been holding its breath, began to exhale. It started in the third row. Constance Webb, retired music teacher, 61 years old, who had spent 34 years listening to young voices and knew exactly what she had just heard, got to her feet. She did not shout. She began to clap, slowly, deliberately, the way you applaud something that deserves to be marked. The man with the phone stood up beside her, then the row behind them, then the row behind that, and then someone said her name. Not a shout, a statement. Zara! Clear and firm, from somewhere in the middle of the house, and then again from somewhere else. Zara! And then it was no longer one voice or two, but the whole room finding the same word at the same time, the way crowds do when something has been taken from them and they decide, collectively, to demand it back. Zara! 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 400 people, rhythmic, insistent, growing, not angry, certain. Derek Foss sat at the center of the judge's table and felt something he had not felt in 11 years of running this event. He felt the room turn. He looked at the two judges beside him, and they were looking at the audience, not at him. He looked at the stage, where Marcus Tilley still stood with the microphone in both hands. He looked at Zara Coleman, who had not moved, who was still standing with her hands at her sides and her chin level, waiting with a patience that was not submission but something far more formidable than that. The chant did not stop. It built. Zara, Zara, Zara. Foss picked up his pen. He set it down. He looked at the audience again, and what he saw was not a crowd asking. It was a crowd telling. He said nothing. He made no gesture. But after a long moment, a moment that the entire room witnessed, that would be described later in exact detail by people who had been there, he gave a single, tight nod. Marcus Tilley walked to the center of the stage and placed the microphone back in Zara Coleman's hand. She looked at it for one breath. Then she found her place in the song, not from the beginning, not from a safe restart, but from exactly the note where she had been cut off. And she sang. What happened next was not a triumph. Not yet. Triumph would come later, and it would be earned in ways that no one in that auditorium could have anticipated. What happened next was something quieter, and, in its own way, more devastating. Zara found the note. Not approximately, not close. She found the exact note, the precise breath, the specific weight of the phrase she had been building toward when the microphone was taken from her, and she continued as though the interruption had been a pause she had chosen herself. Harold Briggs, who was sitting in the 7th row because he had not told Zara he was coming, who had slipped in through the side entrance and taken the last aisle seat so as not to make her nervous, pressed his palms flat against his thighs and held very still. He had heard Zara sing that song 112 times. He knew every choice she made in it, every place where she held back, and every place where she opened. He had never heard her sing it the way she sang it in those next 3 minutes. The room was different now. A room that has just demanded something and received it is a different instrument than the room that existed before. The 400 people who had chanted her name were now listening with the particular intensity of witnesses, people who understood that they were present for something that mattered and who did not want to miss a single measure of it. Zara did not perform for them. She carried the song the way Loretta had taught her. She was the vessel. The song moved through her, and what came out the other side was not a 16-year-old girl trying to impress a judge's table. It was something older and more patient than that. Derek Foss sat at the center of the table with his pen in his hand and his evaluation sheet in front of him, and he did not write anything on it. When she finished, the last note hanging in the air above the auditorium like something that had not yet decided to leave, there was a silence of exactly 3 seconds. Constance Webb counted them later. She told people about those 3 seconds for years afterward, the way you remember the exact weight of a moment that changed the texture of a room. Then the applause came. All of it, all at once, from every seat. Zara stood with the microphone in her hand, and her chin level and her eyes calm, and she gave a single small nod. Not a bow, a nod, the acknowledgement of something received. Marcus Tilley, standing at the side of the stage, exhaled for what felt like the first time in 10 minutes, and Derek Foss, who had not applauded, who sat with his pen in his hand and his evaluation sheet blank before him, understood in that moment that something had shifted in the room's relationship to him. He did not yet understand how much. He would. Now, here is what most people in that auditorium did not know. They did not know that the Tri-County Youth Talent Showcase had a formal adjudication protocol. They did not know that the protocol, written into the Foundation's bylaws during a board revision 3 years earlier, specified that no performer could be dismissed before completing a minimum of 2/3 of their registered performance. They did not know that this provision had been added to the bylaws specifically because of an incident at a previous showcase, a nervous boy, a violin, a fumbled opening, and that the board member who had insisted on including it was a woman named Dr. Yvonne Marsh, a retired federal judge who sat on the Foundation's ethics committee and who had been present at that earlier incident and had not forgotten it. Dr. Yvonne Marsh was in the auditorium that morning. She was seated in the second row, end seat aisle, because she always sat where she could see both the stage and the room. She was 70 years old, precise and unhurried, and she had spent 32 years on the federal bench developing the particular patience of someone who knows that the moment to speak is not always the first moment available. She had watched the microphone taken from Zara's hand. She had watched Marcus Tilley hold his ground. She had watched the crowd find its voice. She had also been watching Derek Foss. She had been watching him for 2 years, quietly, with the attention of someone assembling a record. The provision she had added to the bylaws had never been formally enforced. It had never needed to be, until today. Dr. Marsh did not stand during the chant. She did not clap or call out. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and she watched, and she noted, and she waited. The applause for Zara was still moving through the room when Foss leaned toward the microphone at the judge's table and said, with the recovered authority of a man who has decided the interruption is over, "Thank you. We'll post scores at the end of the afternoon." Dr. Marsh rose from her seat. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. 70 years and 32 years on the federal bench had given her a quality of presence that did not require volume. She said, clearly enough for the first several rows to hear, "Derek, a word, please, now." The 2 words at the end, the now, were not loud. They were absolute. Foss looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. He recognized the register. He had heard it from her before in board meetings, and he had learned that it was not a request. He set down his pen and stood. They spoke at the side of the room, near the exit, and no one heard what was said between them. But people who were watching, and many people were watching, saw Foss's posture change during that conversation. The ease went out of it. The settled certainty of a man who owns the room drained away, degree by degree, and what replaced it was something more careful, more contained. He returned to the judge's table and said nothing further for the remainder of the morning's performances. Marcus Tilley, watching from the side of the stage, did not know what had been said. He would find out later. What he knew in that moment was that something had happened, that the structure of the morning had been altered, and that he had been part of altering it. His hands were steady now. The shame had not left him entirely. He thought it probably should not, but it had been joined by something else, something that felt, cautiously, like the beginning of being right. The showcase continued. 3 more performers followed Zara. They were given their full time. Foss did not raise his finger. But the morning was not finished with him. The scores were posted at 4 in the afternoon in the lobby outside the auditorium on a board beside the foundation's banner. A small crowd gathered. Zara stood near the back of it with Loretta, who had arrived at noon with a container of food and the particular expression of a woman who has been calm about something difficult for a long time. Harold Briggs stood a few feet away, his brown cardigan slightly rumpled from the morning, his cup of coffee, actual coffee this time, from the lobby table, held in both hands and going cold. The scores went up. First, second, third. Zara Coleman's name was not among them. The crowd around the board went quiet in a way that was different from the auditorium's silence. This was the quiet of people doing arithmetic, of people comparing what they had heard that morning with what they were reading now, and finding that the numbers did not add up. Constance Webb, who had been a music teacher for 34 years and who had sat on adjudication panels herself, looked at the scores for a long moment. Then she turned and found Dr. Marsh standing a few feet behind her. "These scores," Constance said quietly, "are not what I heard this morning." Dr. Marsh looked at the board. She looked at Constance. She said, "No, they are not." She said it the way she said everything important, without inflection, without anger, with the particular weight of a person who has already decided what comes next. What most people gathered in that lobby did not yet know was that Dr. Marsh had spent the last 3 hours of the afternoon doing something very specific. She had pulled the Foundation's bylaws from the archive on her tablet. She had documented the timestamp of the microphone removal against the registration record of Zara's performance. She had photographed the judges' evaluation sheets, which were Foundation property, and which she had the authority, as Ethics Committee Chair, to request and review. And she had made 2 phone calls, one to the Foundation's legal counsel and one to a journalist named Patricia Okafor at the Millbrook Courier, who had covered the Foundation's activities for 6 years, and who answered on the second ring. Patricia Okafor had been in the auditorium that morning. She had seen everything. She had taken notes. She had not published anything yet because she had been waiting, with the discipline of someone who knows the difference between a story and a documented story, for what came next. What came next was Dr. Marsh walking to the lobby board, standing beside it with her tablet in her hand and saying, in a voice that carried to every person in that lobby, "The adjudication of this morning's showcase is under formal review by the Foundation's Ethics Committee. All scores are provisional pending that review. No awards will be issued today." Foss was standing 12 feet away. He heard every word. The lobby went completely still, not the stillness of applause building, the other kind. And this time it did not resolve in his favor. The review took 11 days. Dr. Yvonne Marsh conducted it with the same methodical patience she had brought to 32 years on the federal bench. She interviewed the 2 other judges separately without Foss present. She reviewed the audio recording of the morning's performances. The auditorium had a standard recording system for archival purposes, and the recording was complete. She reviewed the evaluation sheets. She reviewed the bylaw provision on minimum performance time. She reviewed the Foundation's stated mission, its grant conditions, and the specific language of the charitable trust under which it operated. She found what she had expected to find. Derek Foss had violated the adjudication protocol on 3 separate occasions in the past 4 years, including the incident with the boy and the violin that had prompted the bylaw revision. The revision had been communicated to all judges in writing. Foss had signed the acknowledgement form. He had violated it anyway, on the morning of the showcase, in front of 400 witnesses and an archival recording. The evaluation sheets told their own story. Foss's scores for Zara Coleman were the lowest of the 3 judges. The other 2 judges had scored her in the top tier. The average score, without Foss's outlier, placed her first in the vocal category. With his score included, she placed 4th. Dr. Marsh noted this in her report. She noted it precisely, without editorial comment, because she did not need editorial comment. The numbers were the editorial comment. She submitted the report to the full board on the 11th day. She presented it in the same conference room where Foss had chaired every meeting for 5 years, sitting at the head of the table he had occupied for so long that the chair had come to feel like his by right. He was not at the head of the table that morning. He was seated to the side, at Dr. Marsh's direction, as a subject of the review. The board voted. It was not close. Derek Foss was removed as chairman of the Millbrook Arts Foundation by a vote of 7-1. The one dissenting vote was his own, cast in the procedural formality of a vote that allowed him to register his objection before the outcome was recorded. The outcome was recorded. The Foundation's legal counsel, reviewing the report and the vote, recommended that the matter be referred to the State Attorney General's office for review of potential charitable trust violations. That referral was made. The Attorney General's office opened an inquiry. It would take 14 months to complete, and its findings would be published in full. Patricia Okafor published her account of the morning's events in the Millbrook Courier 2 days after the board vote. It was the most read article in the paper's online history. It was picked up by 17 other outlets within 48 hours. The headline did not mention Derek Foss. It said simply, "She wasn't finished." The foundation, under interim leadership, announced the results of the corrected adjudication the same week. Zara Coleman placed first in the vocal category. The first place award carried a scholarship to the Regional Summer Conservatory Program, a program that Harold Briggs had attended 40 years earlier as a young musician. Harold read the announcement on his phone, sitting at the piano in the small practice studio on Calder Street. He set the phone down on the piano lid next to his cup of cold coffee. He did not say anything. He sat for a moment in the particular silence of a man who has watched something he believed in be proven right. Then he picked up the phone and called Loretta Coleman to tell her. Loretta Coleman heard the news the way she received most things that mattered, sitting down, with her hands in her lap, in the front room of the house on Calder Street, the small, upright piano visible behind Harold's voice on the phone. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "I know." Not because she had been told, because she had always known. She thanked him quietly and set the phone on the table beside her chair and looked at the piano for a long time. The scholarship letter arrived 8 days later. Zara read it at the kitchen table, while Loretta stood at the counter and did not pretend to be doing anything else. The conservatory program was 6 weeks, residential, in Columbus. It was the same program Harold had attended 4 decades ago, a young man with a cardigan he hadn't yet bought and a future he was still learning to trust. Zara read the letter twice, folded it carefully along its original crease, and set it on the table. Then she got up and put her arms around her grandmother and did not say anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said. Loretta held her. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were dry. She had spent 67 years staying low and building high, and she recognized the moment when the high part finally arrived. The Foundation's interim leadership issued a formal written apology to Zara Coleman and to her family. It was signed by 6 of the 7 remaining board members. The 7th did not sign. He had resigned from the board 3 days after the vote, before the letter was drafted, in a single-paragraph email that offered no explanation and no acknowledgement of what had occurred. His name was removed from the Foundation's donor wall. The placard came down on a Tuesday morning, removed by a maintenance worker who set it in a storage room and did not mention it to anyone. Derek Foss's name was gone from the wall before the week was out. The Attorney General's inquiry, which had opened 14 months earlier, published its findings on a Thursday in late autumn. The report was 43 pages. It documented a pattern of protocol violations spanning 4 years, including the 3 incidents Dr. Marsh had identified in her internal review. It documented the scoring irregularities in Zara's adjudication in statistical detail, noting that Foss's scores for performers from the east side of Millbrook had been, on average, 19% lower than those of the other judges across 5 years of the showcase. The report did not use the word bias. It did not need to. The numbers used it for themselves. The Foundation was placed under a 2-year compliance oversight agreement with the state. New adjudication protocols were written, reviewed by an independent panel that included Dr. Marsh and 2 professional music educators, and adopted into the bylaws. The minimum performance provision was strengthened. A formal grievance process for performers was established, with an independent ombudsman appointed to receive complaints. The Foundation's grant conditions were revised to require annual ethics training for all board members and judges. These were not small changes. They were the kind of changes that outlast the people who caused them to be necessary. Derek Foss was not criminally charged. The Attorney General's findings did not rise to that threshold. What they did was something that, in certain ways, carries its own weight. They were public. They were permanent. They were attached to his name in every search, every record, every account of the Foundation's history. He had spent 11 years building a reputation as the cultural arbiter of the county. The report dismantled it in 43 pages, without drama, without anger, with the dry precision of documented fact. He resigned from 2 other nonprofit boards in the months following the report's publication. He was not asked to join any others. His commercial real estate business continued because money is more durable than reputation in certain circles, but the circles he had inhabited, the galas, the Foundation dinners, the events where he had walked into rooms as though they belonged to him, those circles contracted. Quietly, permanently. The way things do when the room's relationship to a person has fundamentally changed. He had said 8 words to a 16-year-old girl in front of 400 people. 8 words delivered with the flat certainty of a man who had never been made to reckon with their weight. He reckoned with them now. Marcus Tilley received a call from the Foundation's interim director 2 weeks after the board vote. He had expected to lose the event contract. He had made his peace with that. What he received instead was an offer. A full-time position as the Foundation's event and production coordinator, a role that had not existed before, and that the interim director had created specifically because she had seen what Marcus had done on that stage and understood what it meant to have someone in that position who understood the difference between following an order and following a principle. He accepted. He was 24 years old, and it was the first job he had ever taken that felt entirely like his own. He thought about his mother when he signed the offer letter. He thought she would have something to say about it. Something short and precise, the way she always did. He was probably right. Constance Webb wrote a letter to the Millbrook Courier the week after Patricia Okafor's article ran. It was not about Derek Foss. It was about Zara Coleman. It was about what it means to hear a voice that carries something older than itself, and what it costs a room when that voice is silenced before it finishes. It was the most read letter to the editor in the paper's history. Patricia Okafor framed a copy of it and kept it on her desk. Zara left for Columbus in June. Loretta drove her. Harold rode in the back seat with a paper bag of food Loretta had packed and a list of people at the conservatory he thought Zara should introduce herself to. Not to trade on his name, he said, but because they were good musicians, and good musicians were worth knowing. Zara took the list and folded it into her jacket pocket. She did not say she would use it. She did not say she wouldn't. She was her grandmother's granddaughter. She moved in silence. She built in silence. On the last morning of June, before they left, Zara sat with Loretta on the porch of the house on Calder Street. The neighborhood was quiet at that hour, just the sound of a sprinkler 2 houses down and the particular stillness of a summer morning that has not yet decided what it will be. Loretta had her coffee. Zara had a glass of water. The front room was visible through the screen door, the upright piano catching the early light. They did not talk about the showcase. They did not talk about Foss or the report or the scholarship or Columbus. They sat together in the quiet the way they had sat together on 100 Thursday evenings, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything that had already been said and everything that did not need to be. After a while, Loretta said, "The song is not about you." Zara looked at her. She had heard those words 1,000 times. She heard them differently now. "I know," she said. Loretta nodded once, the way she nodded when something was settled, and looked back at the street. "That is where I want to leave them. Not on a stage, not at a judge's table, not in a boardroom or a courtroom or a lobby where scores are posted on a wall. On a porch on Calder Street, in the quiet of an early summer morning. A grandmother and her granddaughter sitting with the particular piece of people who have done the work and let the work speak. Because this is not really a story about a talent show. It is a story about what happens when the world decides, before you open your mouth, what you are worth. It is a story about the people who build themselves in silence, in rooms no one is watching, in $40 lessons and Sunday afternoons at a piano, and 6 years of preparation for a single moment that someone else tried to take from them. It is a story about what restraint actually is, not passivity, not submission, but the disciplined refusal to become what the moment is trying to make you. Zara Coleman never raised her voice. She never broke her composure. She stood with her hands at her sides and her chin level, and she waited. And the waiting was its own kind of power, a power that Derek Foss, with all his certainty and all his influence and all his years of owning rooms, had never learned and could not match. This happens every day. In auditoriums and boardrooms and parking lots and lobbies and offices, in every place where someone with authority and assumption looks at another person and decides, before a single note is sung or a single word is spoken, what they are and what they deserve. It happens to people who are carrying 6 years of invisible work, a grandmother's wisdom, a teacher's belief, a voice that a Grammy-winning musician called singular. It happens to people who will never have a Dr. Marsh in the second row or a Patricia Okafor with a notebook. It happens quietly, and most of the time no one stands up. The question I keep coming back to is this: what is it that we miss every single day because we decided before we listened? Drop a comment. I want to hear what you think. And if you carry something the world hasn't seen yet, a voice, a skill, a gift you've been building in silence, tell me about it. Every week on this channel, we find the people the world overlooked and we tell their stories. If that matters to you, subscribe. Share this one with someone who needs to hear it. The work deserves to be heard.